After years of 5G grabbing most of the headlines, fibre broadband developments are finally getting the attention they deserve as network operators ramp up their investments in next generation fixed access. So, what are the key trends in broadband, and is there a sustainability story to tell? Well, to find out, I'm talking with Geert Henink, VP of Broadband Networks at Nokia. So, Geert, great to talk to you today. There's obviously been a lot of attention and focus recently on climate change issues as politicians from around the world met in Glasgow for COP26. What role does fibre broadband have to play in sustainability strategies?
Thank you, Ray. So yes, very clearly climate change is close to our heart and we need to work everything we can in order to get this better than the situation today. And I'm happy actually to work in this sort of industry because if you look at fiber deployment, this is the most greenest way of deploying broadband services towards an end customer. Why is it the greenest way? Well, in the end, what you do is you're laying out fiber, which will last for more than 100 years, and you are able to simply change the endpoints from the electronics in order to increase the service, to improve the service, to accelerate the service. On the other hand, when you're putting a signal on the line, you basically only use one laser, and the one laser is basically what is using power to serve 30 to 60 customers. So this technology is really beating any other way of delivering a broadband service towards the end user. Geert Standaert, the CTO for Proximus, is stating that once he finished fiberizing Belgium, he will be reducing his energy consumption with 75%. 75%. This is a very significant number. Our own CEO from Nokia, Pekka Lundmark, basically is stating that there is no green without digitization. Now, what does that mean, no green without digitization? If you look at the contribution of the ICT sector towards the whole CO2 emission, this is around 2% of the total emission. 2% is a sort of the same ballpark as all airplanes, which are basically flying. Now, this 2%, this ICT investment, has the potential to reduce the overall CO2 emission with 15% by 2030 by digitizing the way we work, by replacing the air flights and business trips by, for instance, video calls like this and so on. So this is really where fiber is making a very significant impact into our green ambitions.
Okay, so important developments there in terms of sustainability. Now, as mentioned, there's a lot of investment in fibre broadband currently. How do you see the demand for fibre broadband developing?
Yeah, it's very clear that the demand for fiber broadband is increasing and it continues to increase. Residential customers are really expecting a gigabit service and they are expecting the reliability that you get from a fiber deployment. Now, if you look at our customers, being the CSPs, traditionally they went towards the center of the town, the center of the villages. Why? Because it's an easy return on investment. You invest in fiber, you can hook up an awful lot of customers all at the same time. What we do see increasingly is that those sort of operators are now expanding their coverage and they are going to the areas where there are still gaps, like the rural areas. So this sort of investment we continue to see on the fiber side. Traditionally, the operators are deploying fiber for residential services. What you also see is there is a move ongoing for those operators not just to use fiber for residential services, but also entertain enterprise services as well as 5G backhaul services. So there is a whole evolution of new use cases that can be deployed on top of a fiber infrastructure.
Okay, so what does Nokia have to offer here?
Nokia clearly has to offer something in all of the different domains. If we first look at bandwidth demand, we are doing irregular projections as to how much bandwidth is required for an average household. And if you look at this, a couple of years ago, we were projecting that the current technology, which is GPON, 2.5 gig down, shared over 30 to 60 customers, that this technology would be exhausted by 2025. If we now redo the analysis post-COVID, we are seeing that this exhaust is being accelerated by 4 years, which means that today customers are upgrading the network already to the next technology, which is called XGS-PON. XGS-PON is 10 gigabit PON, shared across different customers. We have had a couple of customers who were really announcing this, for instance, Frontier, TDC, and I can also witness this peak by some of the shipments we are doing. If I look at the amount of shipments that I have done on XGS-PON in Q2 of 21, this is 25% of the total volume that I have shipped in the years preceding this. So this is a very steep curve which is happening over here. This is from a bandwidth perspective. The other area is about the coverage. It is very clear that if you want to extend the coverage, you really need to go to the rural areas. And for this, we have launched a dedicated form factor, smaller package to serve this sort of area and to optimize the deployment that you can do in a rural area, but also the hard to reach apartment buildings. Because some of our operators, some of our customers are skipping some of the apartment buildings because it's economically not viable to fiberize them. And we do have solutions in this space, which we will be announcing next month. Lastly, next is new segments. I have been talking about enterprises. I have been talking about mobile space. Now, it is important that in order to serve those, you have the right technology at hand. XGS-PON is clearly helping there, but you also need to look at the next steps, and the next steps are 25 gig PON. You need to make sure that you have the right functionality on the PON layer, like clocking requirements and so on. All of this is being catered for by the equipment that we are delivering. Hence, allowing the operator to really have a unified structure, a unified infrastructure, which allows them to cost effectively deploy the different services to serve the different segments.
Okay, important developments there, Geert. Now, the industry has been talking about fixed and mobile convergence for years now. Are we finally seeing this happening? For example, are operators using their fixed access networks for mobile transport?
So I must be honest to you, Ray, this is still in the early stage. We do have first customers who are really first movers in this area and who are deploying mobile backhaul capabilities on top of an XGS network. So we do have those customers there. And why is this? Those customers, if you talk to customers today, CSPs today, they are really talking only about two things. They are talking about 5G and they are talking about fiber deployment. And that are the two mantras which keep on coming back. Now, once you deploy, and it's a bit separate, so you have a fiber deployment, you have a 5G deployment, they are building in parallel those two networks. 5G networks today are basically built on top of the existing towers, so they are using the existing backhaul. Now, once you really want to benefit from 5G, you're going to densify the network. Densify the network means you're putting more radio towers deeper into the network. And guess what? Suddenly, your transport network from those different radio sites is growing exponentially. And when a customer starts looking into his network, guess what? He finds that he is already deploying a network over there, which is an FTTH network, a fiber to the home network. It was intended originally for residential services, but with the increase in bandwidth, with all the different elements which are added from a capability perspective on clocking and so on, suddenly he realizes that he has a network in place which is drastically reducing the transport cost. Because transport cost in a densified 5G network has become the number 2 issue that customers need to deal with. Having this unified network, this is giving them significant savings, like a 50% TCO reduction versus, let's say, a traditional way of deploying mobile backhaul.
Okay, great. Now, there's quite a lot of activity around 25 gig PON right now, but some in the industry are advocating an evolution from 10 gig straight to 50 gig PON. What's the story here?
Yeah, Ray, and I understand why competition is sort of pushing on the 50 gig because it's what they are doing. Now, from a Nokia perspective, we are not really saying it's 25 versus 50 gig. We are really saying it's an end-to-end story, because in the end, my role as a supplier is really to provide tools in the toolbox of an operator to really select the right technology that he needs. Now, if you look at it from a fiber deployment perspective, what is important for a technology to be successful? It needs to be a need from the operator. It needs to be in the right timing, the availability of the technology, and it needs to be at the right cost points. Let's zoom in for a moment on 25 gig. If I look at 25 gig, is there a need? Definitely. If you look at enterprise services today with XGS-PON, which in reality can only do 7 gigabit per second, you can address the smaller enterprises. If you want to offer a 10 gig symmetrical service, you need to have a higher speed, which is 25 gig. The mobile space is also supporting or requesting higher bandwidth. Even more, those two applications are really targeted towards symmetrical services. So it's important that upstream and downstream are at the same pace. That's something which 25 gig is delivering. Availability. Well, the availability of 25 gig is already there today for the Nokia networks. Each and every customer who is deploying a 10 gig capable network from Nokia is able to activate 25 gig on their network. So it's not like a future requirement. It's not something which will eventually come. It is there today. So also that parameter is being fulfilled. From a cost and price perspective, obviously this is really dependent on what each and every operator really needs and what application he's driving. But if you look at the applications we are targeting for this technology, being enterprise, being mobile space, there definitely, if you compare this with the alternatives, we are having a technology which is already cost effective today. Now, the world will not stop at 25 gig. So hence, as Nokia, we are one of the main contributors in the standardization on 50 gig. And we are also working on 50 gig. Even further, we have reported and we have done some PR around this, that we have worked and trialed with Vodafone a 100 gig technology already in February. So yes, we do need to provide the different tools towards our operators, but it's really not an either or, it's an end-end.
And Geert, finally, what's coming next in the evolution of fibre broadband?
Yeah, now you ask me to look in my crystal ball, which is always a bit difficult, right? Now, the logical first thing to say is it will be a linear evolution of what we do today. Linear evolution of what we do today, we continue to be more green, we focus on the green, we will be adding, let's say, more services on the same infrastructure. Hence, fiber will become a more unified network. But let me highlight simply two other evolutions that I see happening in future. The first evolution is a software-defined access networks, where you provide a sort of interface towards the network and a customer can build his own applications on top of it. This allows for automation, it allows for flexibility, so it really allows an operator to really control what's happening on the network in a more efficient way. Another evolution I would like to talk about is really what's happening from a customer perspective. We see non-traditional customers starting to do fiber deployments. So the first thing that we have seen in the past is basically we have some investors who came in and were simply laying down fiber, and they are wholesaling their infrastructure and offering this as a service towards our traditional CSPs. We see some of the CSPs and the investors now making joint ventures in order to provide this sort of connectivity. And we see this with Deutsche Telekom, we see this with some of the other customers. But the last one I would like to add here is that I also see more and more from the MSO space, being the cable operators, also an increased investment or increased interest into fiber deployments, because they realize that this is a better and more future-safe technology than a coax network, and obviously it helps us in our green targets.
Okay, so lots of really interesting developments there. Geert, great to talk to you today. Thanks very much for joining us.
Thank you, Ray, and it was great talking to you.